So now we're going to move to populations that may be susceptible to develop or to be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. The first set of people that may be more prone to being diagnosed with it or even just showing signs and symptoms of borderline personality disorder are people with any type of negative environmental experiences. This really just means people who grew up in a rough environment, an atypical environment where they're not provided with all the resources they need. The resources meaning, love and care and discipline and, learning obedience, those kind of resources to develop as a person. And any type of individual who grows up in a household that's subjugating, that's emotionally depriving, that's punitive or unsafe or unstable, they're more susceptible to being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and developing some of those traits because they're being neglected, they're being abused by their parents, and something just doesn't sit right within their brains. Another group of people who may be more susceptible are any type of individuals who have experienced repeated abuse, specifically physical abuse, in their lifetime. And since borderline personality disorder is, diagnosed relatively early, I guess would it be about around late 20s, early 20s. This typically happens when they're kids, and it's just repeated abuse and abuse and abuse, and it's going to be by somebody they love, most likely their family members, their parents, or trusted family friends. And physical abuse is the most adamant when it comes to people being susceptible to borderline personality disorder. There have been a lot of studies showing that people who are physically abused as kids, there's a correlation between that and the personality disorder. And finally, another population that's susceptible will be any type of individual who has had negative social experiences. These social experiences typically involve self-destructive behaviors. An example of this would be a person who typically is always in a relationship that's bad and toxic, and it's just a never-ending cycle. They get hurt by an abuser, or they get hurt by someone who's neglecting them, and they break up, they go through this traumatic experience, but then they end up dating someone that once again abuses them or neglects them or just doesn't provide the type of relationship that they need. A lot of people with borderline personality disorder are have attachment issues. So anybody who has an attachment issue growing up or is in the cycle of bad relationships are going to be more susceptible. Another set of people that may be more susceptible to borderline personality disorder are substance abusers, specifically alcohol. Anybody with alcohol abuse disorder, they're either more susceptible to developing borderline personality disorder, or it could be like the other way around, whereas somebody who has borderline personality disorder is going to be more susceptible to being an alcoholic. This is like a chicken and egg type of theory. Which comes first, the borderline personality disorder or the substance abuse? And, I think studies can argue for one over the other, but at the end of the day, any type of person who's using a substance, abusing a substance, probably has an underlying illness as well. And the final group of people I want to talk about are people who have criminal behavior. There is a study done about impulsive and violent offenders being more likely to have borderline personality disorder in comparison to other criminal offenders that are less violent. And so, if you look at the signs and symptoms of borderline personality disorder, you see the impulsiveness, you see their background of being either they might not necessarily be violent, but they've been, people have done violent acts towards them, which just makes them more susceptible. So those are the two groups. Anybody who's experienced a negative environmental experience and anybody who has a negative social experience are more susceptible to developing borderline personality disorder.